So then, we are back with more understandings of the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end as per Yirmiyahu the prophet, known as Isaiah. We find a layer of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yirmiyahu, we find these prophecies extremely important. However, Yirmiyahu is very compacted, because Yirmiyahu was a person. He was able then of receiving information from heaven related with the time of the restoration, the spring feast, the autumn feast, the coming of the Messiah during his time of the political situation while he was then the prophet. And not only this, unfortunately Yirmiyahu had very many other prophecies, but unfortunately they were discarded. Though they were truth, yet they were discarded. But let's be grateful for what we have these days as the record of Yirmiyahu. And then the 23rd chapter explains a very important topic regarding the merchants of the earth. 23rd chapter of Yirmiyahu, 9th verse, stating then the crowning, whose merchants are chiefs, whose traders are the weighty of the earth. When you understand then the holy instructions per the Tzayelic lineage from the Aramaic translation, you read then word by word from the Hebrew, then Aramaic, and then English. Many people, when they understand and they read what they think is Hebrew, truly is Aramaic translation. But let's then understand what this means. When you read the 23rd chapter of Yirmiyahu, you have then another layer of the 62nd. As we understand, in Hebraic understanding, there are no numbers. There are no chapters, no verses. When you read certain content of the instructions, you understand sections of it. Yirmiyahu was very compacted, as was said many times before. You read then the coming of the Messiah, you read then what went on with Miriam, you read then when the Messiah spent his time of the spring feast, you read areas of post-autumn feast. So reading a piece of Yirmiyahu is not only reading on flat surfaces and then understanding as if you understand history, or you are then deciphering a mathematical equation or resolution of a problem. Reading the prophecies requires then history, obviously, culture. Extremely important is then culture. Understanding the Eastern culture, so then when your learning is lined up with Eastern culture, then you understand the prophecies. Without these, you can't understand it, because you are reading text from Eastern understanding, Eastern culture, and then if you try to westernize what you read from the East, it simply doesn't make any sense. So we ended up with thousands upon thousands of denominations, in each of them crazier than the other. But then 23rd chapter, 9th verse, then explains host crowning, merchants are chief, host traders are weighty of the earth. Weighty simply means a strong presence, a strong opinion, a strong influence, a strong authority. This is what it means. What this truly is indicating is then the decision making is becoming again available for those who are merchants. We are not speaking of politicians. Politicians are not merchants. They are dead weight. This is what they are. Merchants are those who have a direct link with the first son of Ibrahim, Ishmael. He started out as a chief of a transportation company. How do we understand? Joseph was sold then to a caravan of the Ishmaelites. Was he not? When those brothers later became then the tribes of Israel, what went on with them? They were envy of Joseph. They were burning within themselves of so much envy. And then he was sold. And the caravan was from the Ishmaelites, coming from Ishmael. So you understand he was a CEO of a company. And these went far beyond our understanding, because then Ibrahim, obviously, and then he had a wife, and you understand, and then later she became Sarah, and then he rejected her and gave her away then to the leader of Egypt, and so on and so forth. And he said that she was his sister, and truly she was his half-sister. And then he came out of the situation after going through a famine in the land. Then he came out of it with lots of animals and servants, and Hagar was a servant that was given to him. Then his wife couldn't bear children, and then he decided then should have children via then his servant. Try to understand, Sarah did not have a word against Ibrahim. The situation of Sarah being angry in a tent and blah blah blah, it was invented. Sarah didn't say a word. She was very kind, and she never rose a word against Ibrahim. She submit, and she did it to the utmost. And this story of having a problem in a tent and being angry and skirmishes, those were invented. Truly what went on was then, obviously Ishmael was born from Hagar, and Ishmael was a king. Try to understand. Ibrahim obviously had an anointing from the Creator himself, and then half of the anointing with his first son, half of the anointing with the second son. So then Ishmael was born, and then Ibrahim then ended up fighting a war, and he won. Then he had lots of riches, and as the child was growing up, Ibrahim then was simply teaching him. Later he became great. It came a point where then he was grown up. The Eastern culture, roughly from 35 to 40 years old, then a person is considered then an early age in life. Then Ibrahim gave the inheritance, and then Ibrahim continued on with his pilgrimage. So there was no first son and second son's understanding of the same tent, and then the wife being angry because of the first son, because the first son was a scoundrel, or then the first son was not legitimate. It didn't take place. The tent was available in peace, so Ibrahim, Sarah, and Hagar, they were living in a tent in peace. There were no skirmishes. Sarah endured a lot, and she didn't raise a word. For many years was like this, until the Creator gave the signal, and then they continue on their pilgrimage. When they did, then Ishmael received his inheritance, and he invested in his trade company. He had many camels and caravans and many places, and people were hard workers. They were no lazy people. They going to the other side of the desert and coming back and bringing what they had, provisions. And sections of the Quran, the Holy Quran, came because of this obedience. Not every section of the Quran, obviously, but there are some portions related with Ishmael. And he was a king. Try to understand, he was extremely rich. Then he continued on with his life. Then obviously they separated. You can easily understand Ishmael stayed with his mother, but they continue on, because then tabernacling was the next step. But the first son was never neglected. Thus then Ibrahim and his wife Sarah, then they went on their pilgrimage. Then not far from this time, then Ibrahim knew his wife, and she bore a son, and it was Isaac. And those two, the first and second sons, they didn't get much of visiting each other. The reason why, it's because the Creator did not, the second son, being involved with a trade. He wanted him 100% focused in what is coming as far as tabernacling. A son related with a trade, the other son tabernacling. Then we understand Ezekiel. The gathering of the sticks of 37th chapter of Ezekiel precisely depicts the first son Ishmael and then the second son Isaac. Tabernacling versus then trade. Work and belief. This is what life is about. But then there are the steps of formation. Try to understand, the Creator, he dislikes very much skirmishes. He was never a skirmish person, and he doesn't admit skirmishes before his presence. Before him it's nonsense. So there were no nonsenses while these people they were together. Then Ibrahim and Sarah had the child. And then later on came Yaakov. So then these understandings are very simple and extremely important, reading these many times. So the mind, as we read these understandings, we then are truly involved with the centuries of history and becoming part of it, as long as we understand Gentiles, they are granted position in a family. However, the lineage, they have more depth when they do these studies. So when Gentiles they visit synagogues, they get an understanding of the reading, but it's very personal, as if a person was one with it. Then 23rd chapter of Yeshayahu, it was mentioned regarding then the merchants of the earth. They are the weighty ones, those with great authority. Then we shift to an area of revelation. What is revelation? A person revealed. Revelation. Twenty-third. Sections of this chapter we find then the merchants again in a place of authority. From Yeshayahu then we read Revelation. Section on the 8th chapter. And then the merchants of the earth. Yes, explain this particular understanding in the Aramaic translation. Then comes the 20th. It's got the prelude. Prelude, chapter 1:8, explains then the merchants bringing lustful materials, and alles, the great city of Babylon, the powerful city, and one her fear and dwell her when they wilt observe the smoke of her burning. Explains what they were involved in transporting. And also many of the understandings of the merchants. What do they understand then of these merchants so many times? Revelation, and then you find in Yeshayahu layers of comparisons. These, they are gathered together ever since the time of Ishmael. From then on, there's lots of history that goes along with it. At the moment, the 23rd chapter Ezekiel 37. So then, the 23rd, and then crowning those who were merchants, chief host traders are weighty of the earth. Precisely then comes the second chapter of Yeshayahu. For the sake of Zion, not I will be silent, for in my sake Jerusalem not. He'll explain every section of the Ishmaelites as they are preparing themselves and refreshing their minds with instructions many centuries ago of what they were and then what they shall be, based from this truth never changed. And the sticks of authority also granted. So these are very true instructions for our time. Later we will start another study regarding these and pointing out on paper what we should read. Because both areas requires finding these layers and the second understanding our time and the future. It's extremely important. Please stay tuned. Ótimo,